Hey there, so today we're going to be practicing two-step equations with word problems. I have a lot of things up here for you guys to look at. You could feel free to take a screenshot and put it next to any problem you want so it could help you. I have in the blue cloud the steps for or the types of equations for one-step equations, and in green I have the first step to solving each of them. In the orange cloud I have the types of equations for two-step equations. And in green, I have the first step to solving each of those. Underneath the orange cloud, there's a reminder for two-step equations that step 1 is always to add or subtract. Step 2 is to multiply or divide. And then in the red cloud, since we're going to have word problems, there's a reminder of all of the components of Q are less. So feel free to take a screenshot of this and reference it while you're working, however it's going to help you. So I'll show you a few problems first. Let's look at problem 1. It says, Deshawn's Bikes rents bikes for $11 plus $5 per hour. Maria paid $51 to rent a bike. For how many hours did she rent the bike? Now that we're in two-step equations, I'm going to open up the option to circle your quantities and relationships instead of rewriting them. So you can still write them like before, but if you would like to, I see that the question is, for how many hours did she rent the bike? So that's going to be your quantity. So I'm just going to circle it and put a little Q there. So if you'd like to do that, you're welcome to do that. A lot of people might think that money is a quantity because it is a unit, but it's not the mystery unit. The question is, for how many hours did she rent the bike? We're not wondering about the money. So money would not be the quantity, although it is a unit in the problem. For R, for relationship, I can see plus. So I'm going to circle that and put a little R next to it. I see per. I'm going to circle that and put a little R next to it. And that's about it. So for two-step equations, you're going to have two quantities. For two relationships, not two quantities. For one-step equation, we had one relationship. For two-step equations, we have two relationships. That's where the two operations come from. So since we've circled our Q and R, you don't have to include them in the written work. So I'm going to go L, E, S, and save some room, and S again. The let statement, as we know, is let X be, and then you copy it on your quantity. Hours she rented, something like that. But you could have worded it differently. Now the equation. So if I look again at my orange cloud, my equation has to look like one of those. So let's see. If I'm looking at the story, it says $11 plus $5 per hour. So if I start with my $11 and then I do plus $5 per hour, per means multiplication or division, but I know if I'm trying to find the total amount of money, I want to multiply that. So 11 plus 5x equals 51. Let's check and make sure it matches one of the options in my orange cloud. To me, it actually looks like option 1, except the components are switched. I have 5x second instead of 5x coming first. But that's okay. In an addition equation, you're allowed to switch whatever you're adding to the different order. So now I'm going to solve. And I even see my reminders there. I always add or subtract first, then I multiply or divide. I only want to work with the numbers that are bothering the x. So my 51 is going to stay put. 51 is not bothering king variable. It's on the other side of the equation. I need to work with my 11 and my 5. The 11 is the thing being added or subtracted, so that's what I'm going to take away first. My 5x didn't get affected. It's just going to drop down. So 5x equals 51 minus 11 is 40. So I've done step 1. Step 2 is to multiply or divide. This is multiplication, so I have to divide. And I get x equals 8. Now my sentence, I want to answer the question. How many hours did she rent the bike? She rented it for 8 hours. Something like that. You could have worded it differently. All right, I will try to leave everything visible. Go ahead and pause the video, try problem 2, come back when you're ready to go over it. All right, hopefully you have completed your attempt at problem 2. You could circle your Q and R like I showed in the last problem, or you could write out Q and R if you prefer to write it out. This time I'm going to show writing it out just in case people prefer that. So Q, R, L, E, S, and leave a space, S. So you could circle, you could write it out. For Q and R, that's where you get the option. So Daniel spent half of his weekly allowance on candy. To earn more money, his parents let him wash the car for $5. What is his weekly allowance if he ended up with $10? So the mystery is his weekly allowance. So that's going to be quantity, weekly allowance. And that has to do with money or cost. So if you wrote like money for his allowance, money allowance, cost allowance, that would be fine too. Dollars allowance. But weekly allowance is just fine. So for relationships, I see half and I see more. So half, which is going to be multiplication or division, and more, which is going to be addition or subtraction. Probably be addition though. So let X be his weekly allowance. So the weekly allowance is the mystery. In the equation, there's 2 different ways that I can show the beginning of the story. The beginning of the story is that he spent half of it. I could either write that as 1/2 X, or I could write that as X over 2, and it's whatever you prefer. I kind of like the X over 2 version better, but they mean the same thing. So I'm going to do X over 2. Then he earned more money, and that was $5. So plus 5. And that's going to equal $10. He ended up with $10. All right, let's see if that matches one of the 2-step equation formats in the orange cloud. Yeah, that is like format number 3. So it's X over something plus something else. So it's a valid equation. And I know I need to add or subtract first, then I need to multiply or divide. So let's go through that. If you came up with a different equation or something that would be totally different, please pause the video and re-solve your equation now and make a new sentence, and then come back when you're ready to see me solve it. All right, at this point in the video, everyone should have solved the same equation that I came up with. I need to add or subtract first. So that means I'm taking away 5 from both sides. That 10 is going to stay put because the 10 is not bothering king variable. It's on the other side of the equation. My X over 2 is going to drop down, and my 5s will cancel out. X over 2 equals 10 minus 5 is 5. That was adding, subtracting. Now I need to multiply or divide. I need to multiply both sides by 2 because X is being divided by 2. I'm going to bring it over here. I get X equals 10. So his weekly allowance is $10. That's your unit. You need that dollar sign. And let's see if that makes sense. He spent half of his money on candy. So he spent $5 on candy. He had $5 left. Then his parents gave him another $5, and he ended up with $10. Yeah, that makes sense. Please pause the video and try number 3. Come back when you're ready to go over it. All right, hopefully you're ready to go over number 3. This time I'm going to go back to circling my Q and R. And it's really just your choice of what you prefer. So here's LESS. You should have already solved this one. Shauna sold half of her comic books and then bought 5 more. She now has 24. With how many did she begin? So The question is, how many did she begin? That just means how many comic books did she start with? So that's my cue. But if that's not clear from the sentence, maybe I'll put in parentheses comic books before. Something like that. How many comic books did she start with? Because they kind of worded it weird. So that's my cue. My relationships, I see half. So that's going to be an R. And then bought 5 more. So more could be an R. Maybe you circled bought. I think bought would be okay too. But I should have 2 relationships because it's a 2-step equation. So 1 Q, 2 R's for all of these. So let X be comic books before. You could also have said comic book she started with, how many comic books she started with, something like that. All right, now the equation. So I see she sold half of them. So I mean she's getting rid of half. Just like in the previous question with Daniel, you can show half of something by doing 1/2 x, or you can show it as x over 2. They mean the same thing. I like to do the x over 2 version. So I'm going to do x over 2. All right, and then she bought 5 more, plus 5. Wow, it actually ends up being the exact same beginning of the equation from the Daniel problem on number 2. She now has 24. So I know it matches one of my 2-step equation options. It's number 3, just like the Daniel problem. It's the exact same equation, except instead of a 10, there's a 24. If you came up with a different equation, please pause the video and re-solve it and write a new sentence. But if you came up with this equation, keep watching. So I know I have to add or subtract first. Gonna subtract 5 from both sides. That 24 is gonna stay put. It's on the opposite side of the equation from the x. Drop down my x over 2. 24 minus 5 is 19. Step 2 is to multiply or divide. So times 2 on both sides. And I'm gonna get x equals 38. She had 38 comic books. She sold half, bought 5 more. She sold half, so she would have had 19. Then she bought 5 more, which is 5. And yeah, that equals 24. So that's just a little double check to make sure it does make sense with the problem. All right, go ahead and try